Thanks for coming to this particular session. I know we'd all like to go to all the sessions, I'm sure, but I think this is a particularly major issue, talking tackling the housing crisis. I think it's quite clear that this is the burning political question, certainly in London, but actually it's a question that affects the entire country, and the absolute inability of the current austerity policies and the government in general to tackle, to meet some of the most basic needs of people for shelter, for housing that they can actually afford, and so on. Is they can't even meet those needs. It's making them far worse. As you may have noticed, Eileen Short is not here at the moment. Her presence is imminent. She may be wandering her way through the maze of the building as we speak, but if not, no doubt we can pick up a discussion with experiences of anyone on the demo that she helped organise the March for Homes recently, which saw thousands of people marching on Boris Johnson's City Hall on an actually thoroughly miserable day in terms of the weather, but a fantastic exuberant demo of about 6,000 people. So that was a fantastic campaign that she organised. If she does pop in at some point, I'll stop everything and she can do her feedback. But if not, I'm sure this will come out in the discussion. We do have another very important speaker here that you're going to hear from. Janette Evans from the Our Hendon campaign. They're building a coalition, a movement to stop the eviction of our West Hendon. And I'm sure no one from Great Hendon will be turned away, but our West Hendon campaign is a fantastic campaign that's trying to stop the corporate eviction of ordinary working people. So she's going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then I think we'll throw it straight into the discussion. As I say, if Eileen pops in, we'll get her to sort of feed in. Some things to think about. Obviously, we're talking about what we put in a People's Manifesto. So concrete ideas about tackling the housing crisis, solutions, and that can include campaigns for strategies for how we actually stop these kind of things as well. So if anyone has any particularly bright ideas, we do have these fantastic speech bubbles, so do come and fill some in at any point or at the end of the session, and we're going to feed that into at the end of the day. So without further ado, Janette, if you'd like to speak for about 10 minutes.
Hi, my name's Janette. I would say I was a really important speaker actually, and if I can just say this is not normally my role. I kind of see myself more as a foot soldier, right? I'm usually out there in the thick of things. I'm not usually in meetings and speaking at the front and stuff like that, so bear with me if I come across as that being very obvious. Also, I know this stuff like the back of my hand because I'm so passionate about it, but I'm so worried about not doing it properly that I've written it all down. So if it looks like I'm reading it and I know that that's not the kind of way to do it, I'm sorry about that as well. And I'd just like to say that the groups that I'm talking about, I think it's important to remember that we are not a disparate group of grassroots campaigns. We are organising and collaborating to form a movement. This is what this is about, the housing campaigns that I'm involved with. I'm from a group in Barnet called Barnet Housing Action Group, and we're campaigning with the Our West Hendon and Sweets Way, which is a new campaign at the moment, Fight for Housing. West Hendon is a council estate built alongside the conservation area called the Welsh Harp. It's a beautiful area with a reservoir and lots of wildlife and stuff. There's 680 properties, council properties. A mix of secure, non-secure, a few private renters and leaseholders. All of these homes are going to be bulldozed, and in their place will be built 2,000 luxury apartments, 2014 of which, the non-luxury of course, will be council flats. The new luxury flats are being built alongside the Welsh Harp with beautiful views and open spaces, which incidentally the residents there at the moment have already got. Whilst the secure council tenants, they're the only ones that are being rehoused on the estate, are being housed in a block which is being built alongside the Edgware Road, in the middle of a gyratory one-way system, which used to be a car park, with a view onto the back of the mechanics, garages and kebab shops on the Edgware Road. Some of the kitchen windows actually look out onto brick walls. Barnet Council will not own the building where the secure tenants are being put. They're leasing it from Metropolitan Housing Association, and Barnet gave the land. They didn't sell it, they gave the land in which the West Hendon estate currently exists to Barrett developers for nothing. The new development will be called Hendon Waterside, but the West Hendon tenants won't be anywhere near a drop of that water. The majority of people currently living on the estate will be decanted, a horrible term which I can't stand, the council used, to other areas. No one knows where until the very last minute of the decanting process. The secure tenants moving into the car park still don't even know how much their rents are going to be. And the leaseholders are fighting compulsory purchase orders at the moment in which they are being offered over £100,000 less than the market value of their properties. On the other side of our borough, the beautiful borough of Barnet, in the north, we have a very recent campaign where a whole estate, 153 households, have been evicted because Barnet Council have given permission to the owners of the land, Annington Homes, to bulldoze the whole estate and rebuild with 300 luxury apartments, 11% of which would be affordable, a term which we shouldn't even engage with, and no social housing at all. The mix of temporary and emergency and private tenants that were already living there are going to be dispersed, or have been rather dispersed out of the borough, many into substandard accommodation, and all against their will. We have seen a letter instructing a tenant to move to Birmingham the next day, and know of one case where a tenant who'd just been moved there from temporary accommodation into emergency accommodation, had only been living on this estate for 2 months, and then was forced to move again, evicted, when I say forced, to move into another emergency accommodation, but just for 10 days, and then will be moved from there again into temporary accommodation. And she's already been living in temporary accommodation in Barnet for 16 years. She's got a child. She was forced that day to move because she really didn't want to. She was so ill. She was just asking them, could she have just a few more days? But they insisted. I had a councillor phone up at Barnet Homes went around there with a removal van. They forced her to move. So she ended up moving to this 10-day emergency property. Couldn't get in touch with her son, who was in school, 14-year-old. So he came home at the end of the day to his house boarded up, and a neighbour waiting for him with a piece of paper with an address on it saying, this is where you live now, this is where you manage, this is where you need to go. This is how people are being treated by Barnet Council, not being treated like human beings. I used to say Barnet Council treat people like cattle, they can just ship them here, there and everywhere. Actually, it's even worse than that, they treat people like furniture, like they're not even human, they can just shove them in the back of the van and send them where they like, and they just don't give a toss. It broke my heart to see, you know, this lady's son is 14, she's been living in temporary accommodation for 16 years, I can't remember the time she's been evicted and moved on, because all this temporary accommodation is in private accommodation. So her son has been living in temporary accommodation ever since he was born. This is the experience of a lot of people in Barnet. Yeah, you know, and she was just bullied into it, actually. There are only 10 families left now on this estate. It's like an how do you say that word? Apocalyptic science fiction film. The majority of tenants that lived there were refugees and asylum seekers, and we believe that this is why Barnet Homes and Annington Homes felt that they could get away with treating them so harshly. The eviction process was not explained comprehensively, and neither was the bureaucracy around the process for accepting offers of homes to move to. And for some, this has resulted in them being discharged from the responsibility of Barnet Council completely to rehome them. Private renting in Barnet is almost impossible. Estate agents require a minimum of £36,000 a year salary, a lot of them £50,000 a year to be taken on their books. Back in September 2013, there was only 6% that would take on housing benefit tenants. Now I believe it's practically nil. We had 18,000 on the waiting list in Barnet in 2013, and they dealt with this by abolishing the list. They've addressed the crisis by building 3 council homes in the last 22 years. And they're not even real council homes because they're 5-year flexing tenancies. Because according to Barnet Council, the idea of that is that you may need a council house, you may be in the financial position of needing a council house at some point in your life, but then once you've brought up your children, hopefully you've got into a better financial position, you're able to move out and let that home free, that council home free, for another family that maybe you're in that position that you were in when you moved in there. How many people that we know that bring their children up in 5 years, I've got no idea. Don't know if we should be kicking our kids out when they're 5 or when they're 10 or when they're 15. No, I wouldn't be surprised if that's another Tory policy that will be coming out soon. At present, they have an unprecedented consultation in operation whereby they are proposing to raise council rents to 80% of market value or to the London housing allowance, whichever is lowest, which would mean that many will not fit the criteria. They have to be entitled to apply for council housing, which would be less than a certain amount of income that you earn, or because it would be 80% of market value to be earning a certain amount to be able to afford that rent. That's a very crafty policy from Barnet Council, because we believe the purpose of this policy is that Barnet on paper would be able to show that no one is applying for council housing, which therefore in theory makes it look like there isn't a need. And they will then be able to bring about the real agenda, their ultimate aim, which is to get rid of council housing completely in Barnet. Thank you.
You do yourself a disservice. Not only was that very incredibly informative and powerful, we actually managed to keep perfectly within the time limit. Obviously natural. So we said we hadn't done this all the time, we wouldn't have. So thank you, I think that's a very important contribution. I think we'll throw it out open to discussion for about 30 minutes. Contributions, ideas, policy suggestions, and we'll to put your hands up and we'll take from there. Yes, the woman in the front.
Well, I mean, one of the things, because we've kind of got interested in the whole housing thing, is that not many people know about this. And one of the things is really naming and shaming those housing providers. A friend of mine, for instance, was going to do a swap into a council house in Hoxton with metropolitan housing. And I said to her, look, before you do it, just check if they have any signs of building and pulling down, because you're moving into an area where there's lots of development. After her discussion with me, she said, I've looked into it, they're saying they're not going to do it. We didn't know it was this thing about metropolitan housing, and people have to know who these housing associations are, who these builders are. It's kind of the same kind of campaigns that are going around tax avoidance need to be directed towards these big companies, because that's what they are. And really they need to be held to account. I mean, I'm absolutely appalled at the stuff that I've been hearing.
Sue.
Yeah, Sue Corbett. I'm a teacher. Actually, many years ago, I taught in Barnet, and that was the start of when they were starting to sell everything off and privatise. Really, everything to do with Barnet Council has been sold off. And we said then, you know, the predictions of what would happen and what we're seeing now is the consequences of that, I think, is completely outrageous. I think what you explained was really horrific, and you explained it very well as well. Thank you very much for that. I now work in for Hackney Council, which meant that I was kind of a little bit involved around the New Era campaign. And one of the things that we did as teachers, both in Hackney and in Islington, was we said that there's a big scope, I think, for involving the teaching unions in these campaigns from the point of view of what is happening to the kids. You know, what is the effect on that child's education who goes home when he's 14 years old and finds his flat boarded up, or when the families are told they've got to go and move 10, 20 miles away because their rent is now suddenly above the rent cap in terms of their, you know, the benefits cap and stuff like that, you know. So I think there's a big impact in terms of children's education and a big scope for making contacts between the campaigns and the public sector unions in general, obviously, but I think teachers in particular, I think there's much more scope for collaboration there. I do know Keith Nason, actually, I don't know if you know him well, who's the Secretary of Barnet NUT, and it might be worth getting in touch with him and getting them involved in the...
We've actually got some teenagers in the
Yeah.
streets where they're wet in the bed.
Oh,
Yeah, no, absolutely, these things will happen, And the other thing it strikes me as well is just that really, you know, there's like 10 empty homes for every homeless family in London. You know, the situation in London is really chronic. I was reading a Facebook page, I know there's lots of them, called London's Young Workers Need Homes, where young workers are going on and putting their stories about how they can't find accommodation. I know my son and daughter have had to move quite a long way away in order to, you know, start a family and stuff like that. It's, you know, it is annoying. But I think, given those statistics for the empty homes, I really think that we could do with a really good squatters movement. I know people have done it a little bit. I know there was some around the Carpenters, what was that called? The E15 and stuff like that. You know, I do think there's scope for a big, well-organised squatters movement, actually, that starts reoccupying some of these empty homes. Yeah.
Thank you, Sue. The gentleman here.
Thank you, Viv. I was, until a few years ago, a community lawyer at the Brent Community Law Centre. I was, when I was young, one of those who were resisting gentrification of working class areas and supporting the squatters movement in Redbridge and so on. And I tell you that we are pretty much back and worse to those early days. And we're in a circumstance where people are easily calling for remedies, but where remedies simply won't operate as they used to because of the way the finance of London housing is structured. So it's all very nice, for example, calling for rent controls, but to make rent controls effective in what is a global investment market is an extremely difficult job. And what I really want to see in terms of the alternative manifesto is that we start drilling down into what is happening to London's housing and how we address it. By all means, we must fight every single battle and so on. But Barnet is, I know Barnet well, I have a lot of it, and so on in the area. I'm full with them, and I say I used to work next door. Barnet is particularly graphic and particularly stupid. But don't forget that every single London authority is currently entering the speculation market, selling off effectively London land, doubling the sizes of estates to produce luxury housing. In Camden, where I live now, in the middle of what used to be a working class district, they built a little estate called Chester Balmore. They have not added one social housing unit to the replacement. All the added units are luxury housing. There were 2 studio flats on that estate. And the first sold studio, let's say 1 room institution, the first sold for £300,000 and the second sold for $315,000 within a few weeks. Council leaseholds in our area are now selling up to £500,000. And in one of the tower blocks, which is particularly luxurious with a good view, we're up to £750,000 for a council second transfer of leasehold or third transfer of leasehold. We've really got to drill down into blocking the investment potential. The estate where we get American pension companies buying up, just follow the rest of the world, buying up our London housing and evicting people. Of course we struggle, of course we unite and so on, we help and we win particular battles, but until we prevent London from being the investment opportunity in the world of preference, until we stop deliberately enticing the rich into London, until we stop giving the bankers free money that they can make profits out of, and so on, until we start really addressing what is fundamentally happening to London, then all our little battles are going to be...
But is that really a campaign? Sorry.
Just to say, Eileen has turned up. We're going to give her a few minutes just to catch her breath and acclimatise to the chilly mountain-like atmosphere. So I'm going to take a few more speakers. There's a whole forest of hands. Eileen's here, which is fantastic, but it does mean we have to keep it as concise as possible because we want to get as many people in as possible. The woman here in the picture.
I wanted to talk about the thing from two levels because, you know, I hear everything that Janette's saying and that, you know, terrible situation there is in Barnet. But we need to look at it globally as well. I think we do need to do the squatting and the campaigning and the protesting because I think it's really important, grassroots and involving as many people. But as the first speaker was saying, we need to do some education. I mean, I have spent 40 years working in education. I agree with everything that Sue says about the impact on children of being moved around and you just put them up, put them down somewhere else and their schooling doesn't matter. But as an educated person myself, it wasn't until recently, looking at my mum's situation, and she's at 98, that she's got rent protection. You know, they can't put up her rent. And I thought that was universal. No, it's only because she's been in her house for nearly 30 years. And all of that in the Thatcher era was wiped away. So I think, you know, if I've missed it, and I feel myself, I've been, you know, a political campaigner and an activist and in the NUT and so on, I've missed it, haven't realised what's been going on in housing. There's an awful lot of people out there that need to know more about it. And that kind of education needs to go alongside what we put in the manifesto, and we do need policies at a global level because, you know, Camden Council might be more gentle than Barnet, but all councils are doing it. All councils are doing it.
Thank you. Now, we have to keep very, very tightly a minute, really, because there's a whole number of people who want to speak. I want to get as many people as possible. The gentleman in the sort of purple.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Burnham, I'm from Haringey Defend Council Housing, and we could replicate a lot of the things which Barnet is saying. So in Haringey, the council wants to knock down 4,800 homes, 3,700 of those are on council estates. This is a Labour council. They don't accept that they're doing it. They never use the word demolition. We went to a meeting on last Wednesday where the officers just lied through their teeth and said they're going to replace every secure council home with another secure council home with the same tenancy at the same rent level. The council's written documents don't say that. The officers go around telling tenants all this stuff. So I think we have to keep on campaigning during the election and after the election. But I think around the elections specifically, you know, that this is our chance. This is our 5 minutes of democracy, or our 15% of democracy. We have to grill the candidates on this. We have to make housing and council housing secure housing, decent low rents. You know, stopping the privatisation of council dwellings, stopping the privatisation of housing associations that the housing associations are pushing for. All these things we have to make national issues. To the extent that it's hard to reach for people like ourselves to reach national issues, we're certainly going to be speaking to all the candidates in Tottenham and all the candidates in Hornsey and Wood Green and making sure that they answer and are accountable to the electors on that. So we're using the election, I think, to open up the issues relating to the council that are really, really important. And just to conclude, there are some ways. It's over whether or not we have permanent tenancies. This government gave councils an option on that. Haringey dithered about it for over a year and a half because the leading group in the council wanted to have 5-year tenancies. The tenants didn't want it, and a group of the Labour Party rebelled, and they had to say, OK, we'll carry on having permanent tenancies. But that issue is going to come back. It's going to come back after the election. We have to make sure we win issues like that. So in other words, it's on estates, it's by having squatting campaigns and so on. It's also winning specific local issues through specific local authorities. Yes, let's use the election to win those struggles after the election is over.
Thank you very much. So I know there's a chorus hand. I'll try and get you all in, but I'm going to go over to Eileen now, who's going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes, and we'll introduce some more dimensions to this, no doubt. So I've noted people want to speak. So Eileen Schott from Defend Council Housing.
Thanks for inviting us, and can I begin by apologising? We had a march for the Aylesbury in Southwark, which is where I was, so it's a kind of apology, but not entirely, because it was because really I just want to say a few things. There is a new housing movement beginning to emerge, and it's bringing together people from different tenures. It's bringing together campaigns, one-off campaigns, you know, the Bargy Travellers who are fighting for more moorings to be reinstated on Bowlats, with campaigners on housing in general, the squatters movement and so on. And crucially, I think for a lot of us, it's bringing together, if you like, the last generation, like me, who've been campaigning on housing and were, if you like, came through the fight against council housing privatisation, with a new generation, often private renters, but who it seems to me, partly because we won some of the fight, we still have council housing, it still exists, a whole new generation, especially in London, but I think London's only different by degree from other places, get why council housing is important. Now, I wasn't sure we would win that argument. Even 3 years ago, I think a lot of people thought council housing is the old dodder sport over there kind of thing, and you're lucky if you get it, but irrelevant. But actually what I've realised is lots of private renters are living on council estates, next door to somebody with a secure tenancy, paying 4 times the rent with no security. Now, if ever there was a way to get the point about council housing, that is it. And I think the March for Homes, which Defend Council Housing was part of co-organising with the London People's Assemblies and lots of others, showed that we can do that. We can bring together people whose housing needs are very different, whose housing campaigns are quite different, who are from across different parts of London, and make one, if you like, fighting fist, or if you don't like that analogy, think of another one, but building a housing movement. And in that process, we managed to have some agreement about what the demands were, without a big deal of fuss, actually. We agreed 7 demands for the March for Homes. We can talk about what they were if anybody needs to. We managed to bring together lots of strands of the left, the people who think, you know, there were the Greens, there was Labour left in the People's Assemblies, there was all of the left of Labour left, with lots of anarchist and autonomous groups, and we managed to all work as one. And of course in that, there's a lot of debate and discussion about what tactics are. You know, is occupation the end point in itself? The point really, from Defend Council Housing point of view, the point of having a march for the Aylesbury today was to say, okay, there's been a long fight on the Aylesbury, they defeated stock transfer, tenants voted to stay on the estate and have the estate refurbished in 2001, so that council is pushing ahead with demolition plans. An occupation on the Aylesbury that came out of the March for Homes has been great in raising the temperature, but in itself it isn't enough. We need to get out on the streets, we need to make this a Southwark-wide issue, we need to make it a London-wide issue actually, because there are only what we know of 70 estates across London, mostly council, some housing association, threatened with demolition or redevelopment. It's partly about how the money's being loaded. It's partly because developers have got pound signs in their eyes. The government is giving them open season. Eric Pickles, if it's all right, I'll pass around this petition. Eric Pickles has described council estates in London as brownfield sites. So it's real, here you go people, get and take, help yourselves. And too often, our elected political representatives are colluding in that. And I would say, I mean, I could be very rude, but I think quite often it's, and certainly in the case of a lot of Labour councils, it's because they think there is no alternative to the market. They think there's no other way of doing development, and therefore, no, I don't need to go on to you lot about why that's not true. But actually this is where council housing first came into existence, as an alternative to a private housing market which does not provide housing for working class people. Never has actually. And all of the fights to win council housing were exactly to claw the right to a home out of a system that would happily, particularly when times are hard, squeeze us back into hovels of 20 of us living under one roof. So I think we have to learn from the past as we, you know, not to be slavish, but the 1919 rent strikes in Glasgow. The key thing I think to learn from that, apart from the fact that tenants and trade unions really operate together, was that it took 2 months for after the Glasgow rent strike, which then started spreading across the country against profiteering First World War landlords. It took 2 months for the government to introduce rent controls. The government, which had said it never, 2 months. So don't tell us it can't be done. If there's enough of a movement, we can do it. 1945, post Second World War, you know, council housing didn't just fall from the skies as a good idea. There was mass agitation all through the war. The Communist Party led groups of tenants from the East End into the Ritz to sit down at the tables and say, well, you know, if you're not safe in the East End, we'll sit here, thank you very much. And I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I think the Communist Party was often in the lead of the post-Second World War mass squatting of the empty army bases. This is a left, you know, the left has led these fights for housing, has combined mass agitation with mass direct action. There's a whole conversation to be had about squatting, but and I'm all for people solving their own individual housing problems however you can. But there is a real danger that if we say to occupy or to squat 2 or 3 flats is our act of political opposition, actually what you've got is a geographically narrowed right down movement that isn't out on the streets, isn't challenging. So we need to learn from each other. I don't say this in the spirit of I'm wagging my finger, I'm saying it in the spirit of how do we build, how do we win? Because actually it's too urgent to be, this isn't just a game of my political organisation, your political organisation. This is not, a new housing movement is emerging, it will test us all. And I don't think anybody's got a complete monopoly on tactical wisdom, but we have got things to learn. And I think in the 1960s, this is a thing that I think is absolutely relevant right now. Lots of councils all over London and elsewhere, as part of a move to push back on the Rackman landlords, there was regulation, they introduced regulation and inspection of private landlords. And where private landlords failed, councils took over. Lots of street properties that we have as council all over, I don't know, everywhere, but in Tower Hamlets and in Hackney and in Islington and in
and Harringay.
there you go. So most places, but also in Sheffield and Leeds and were taken over then by councils pushing to say we will use council powers to take direct action of a political sort to stop the Rackman landlords and create council housing. Now it seems to me, Danny Doring says we've got more bedrooms per head of the population now than we've ever had in Britain. The problem is, as we all know, how they're distributed, how much they cost, who they're for, how they're designed and all like that. But we need to go back to those 60s days. We need rent control and powers to regulate the private renting sector, and councils need to demand the resources to do the job properly, and where private renting isn't done properly, to take it over. And it seems to me that requires a movement to push them, and it also requires councillors with some bottle to actually get in and do it. This movement that is emerging, which, you know, as I'm trying to say, we need to have the protests and the marches and the lobbies, we need to have the direct action on the occupation, and we need to turn that into mass activity, not enclave, exclusive activity. And it needs to be combined with political demands, because, you know, one of the other threads in the movement at the minute is, oh, we don't make political demands, but we do demand that you don't demolish the Aylesbury estate. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that is a political demand. Who is going to not demolish it? But we have to make it into mass politics, because I do understand what people say about if you just put demands and you don't do anything, then actually all you're doing is being a sort of political lobbyist of a kind that is not being very effective at the minute. So we need to make these into real things. That's, I suppose, what I'm trying to say. Sorry, I'm gabbling a little bit because I've come off the march. And, so Defend Council Housing has produced a 10-point manifesto for tenants. We talked about it over the last year with the squatters movement, with private renters, about those bits of it. We've attempted to deal with the question of right to buy. I could read it all out, but I suspect you don't want me to. And some of the things I've just mentioned, but some I haven't, like ending bedroom tax and benefit caps are a crucial part of all this. But two things, that all new housing development needs to include a minimum of 50% really affordable housing for rent, which increasingly means it has to be council housing, because housing associations are increasingly trapped as some of them very willingly, as an arm of development, building. So London Quadrant are building 2,000 market rent homes. That's their claim. Those other housing associations are floating, bond, whatever you do, bond. Anyway, issuing bonds. And, yeah, I mean, they're shifting through economic pressures. I mean, they've really been the vehicle of neoliberal deregulation in housing, and that's why I'm proud that Defend Council Housing fought them all the way, not because they were the embodiment of all evil, but because if you move council housing over to housing association housing, you're moving us from public sector and some capacity to use public accountability as a check into legally private and everything that's followed over the last 20 years. But the other point, and I think it's a point that we all need to turn into an action point, is that all public land should be used to create 100% publicly owned, really affordable council housing. And it seems to me that everywhere there is a former post office, an ex-hospital building or a clinic or a bit of scrubby land that we can make into a battle. If there isn't, I know in Tottenham there's a battle already, and I would say even there, this is not a battle to be left just to tenants in Tottenham and you kind of wait until everybody on Broadwood Farm gets what's going to happen, and by then it's often too late because they've already one of the locks has been cleared or something. This is a fight. This is a hands-off Tottenham, stop the developers, who does this place belong to? Because this is about the shape of London and the shape of the city. And it's true everywhere, and we all have a part to play in actually stopping it.
Thanks for your fantastic work and making it down despite being on demo. That's absolutely brilliant. Now, according to my very strict notes, we actually technically only have 5 minutes. Maybe we can have a bit of lyric, but what I'm going to do, I'm not going to take everyone who wants to speak. That's the reality. I'm going to take 3 or 4 speakers, and I'm going to. I know that Janette has got some solutions to the housing crisis. I know that a few more. So I'm going to take 3 or 4 speakers. Keep it very brief, under a minute. We're talking here. I'm going to start with Ruth.
Thank you. I'll try and be quick. I agree with what the speakers said, and I think the issue about educating people is really important. I think there's a lot of confusion about what affordable means. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what social means in terms of housing, and people's belief that things are actually a lot better than they really are. So the need for us to keep on having that dialogue. And also I think we could do more to expose the economics of the enormous amounts of public money going into the pockets of private landlords.
Yeah,
and I think if people understood quite how huge that was, and that one of the benefits of proper council housing is not only it improves life for tenants, but that money is going into building what is a social aspect, and we still need, I think, to do that. I'm an activist in Unite, and like Patrick, I work in the law centres movement. And I think we also need to put this in the overall arena really of assaults on people's rights all over the place. So private sector tenants have very, very, very few rights, even if they can enforce them, which often they can't. But the issue that you raised briefly, Eileen, about welfare reform, just the unsustainably low incomes that people both in and out of work are expected to manage on now are creating individual issues about rental arrears. And I just wanted to raise the huge loss of legal aid that is making it even harder, and the Immigration Act will bring in a requirement for private sector tenants to prove their immigration status before they can get new tenancy, and that's already been piloted in the Midlands. but there's no longer legal aid for immigration advice. So we're seeing both particularly older Caribbean generations who've been in the UK for a long time, who can't prove their status, and also young people who thought they were British and their schools thought they were British, unable to access education or housing. And I think that whole point that you made, Janette, about you make the criteria so difficult, it looks like no one needs it. And I think the same is happening with a whole range of other services, including legal aid, where lack of take-up, because it's made so difficult, it's been taken as lack of need.
Thank you very much. Very quickly, the gentleman in front of the check shirt.
Yes, thanks. David Flint, Green Party candidate for North Enfield, so if you want to grill me, you're very free to. Green Party has great policies on housing. I won't go into them, but I want to say just one thing. That most of the problems we're facing have to do with the amount of money coming into London, generated in London. A lot of the problem is the money generated in the city, and therefore a key element of solving this problem is doing something about casino banking, the excessive profits being made in that sector. And take out the money, and a lot of the drive to demolish property will go away, because it will no longer make economic sense. I'm not saying that is the whole answer, I'm saying it is a key part of the answer.
Thank you very much. Now I'm getting stern looks from my co-organisers at the back there, so I think I'm going to have to cut it off. I do apologise. Please do participate in the other discussions and get involved with the North London People's Assembly as well. I'm going to bring back our speakers. I'll start with Janette. Do 1 or 2 minutes. Please take it away.
I don't know if I can talk what Eileen said there, and I agree with everything that she said. And like I said at the beginning, you know, this is about creating a movement. This is not about a lot of disparate groups, really. I mean, ideas in our group that we think particularly are an end to measures deliberately intended to encourage speculation and raise property values, such as Help to Buy. No further sell-offs of public housing, whether as right to buy or stock transfer as regeneration projects. No sell-off of social housing, for example, where philanthropic trusts are selling. They must be legally compelled to sell only to those who can guarantee equivalent rents under the threat of CPOs. Tax second homes, introduce progressive council tax bans, rent controls at no more than 35% of earnings. I mean, I think at one point in the past, rent used to be 20% of earnings, didn't it? You know, goodness knows what it is now. Use it or lose it CPOs at pre-speculation price of all unused development land. Heavy progressive taxation of multiple properties. Greater use of CPO powers on under-occupied properties and empty properties. Acquisition of public property, increased right to sell opportunities to allow owners in negative equity or other difficulties to sell to councils, and a borough nationwide audit of land and property ownership, because how can a council which does not know who the current landlords are plan a housing policy?
Can I please add to that, secure tenancies for renters, it's just, you are just,
Oh, yeah.
honestly,
Well,
you
that
just have
goes-
nothing.
That goes unsaid.
You've just got nothing.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Yes, we
Yeah.
please write that up and we'll circulate it and put it into this thing. That's a fantastic list of some brilliant solutions there. Eileen, the goal's been thrown down now. Go on.
Yeah, okay, well we have a 10-point tenants manifesto. I'm not going to leave it out, but I'll happily send it you.
Yeah, we'll circulate.
But one thing I want to say is, this is not going to be fixed without major public investment. It is that, and you know, it needs, we need to hammer that and to take the point that you were making. Some of that is about making an argument where the subsidy actually goes. Council housing is actually not, is minus subsidised at the moment. And public land, which was bought by our generation before us and paid for out of council tenants' rent, is being
Given away.
Yeah, exactly. Where this is the land where we need to build the homes we need. The government is actually doing, London is doing a database of public land for all.
Yeah, but that's only to sell it off more
Absolutely,
quickly.
for all the wrong reasons. So I think there's we need to redirect public subsidy away from developers and bankers and into building the homes we need. There's a couple of generations then that have come up with a formula for how you might do that. You might levy a tax on private renters, which is equivalent to the amount of housing benefit they're getting. So that if you could force the housing benefit down, then the tax could go down. But Defence Council Housing has said we should have a quantitative easing intervention to write off all the historic debt for council housing, which would free up councils with an enormous amount of money to get on with building, and then they wouldn't be able to fudge this argument. But one other thing I want to say is in that programme, I think we need to link it to the highest possible energy efficiency standard and effectively green jobs by, there are councils at this moment fitting solar panels on all the south-facing buildings of the council housing. And why we can't make that a national programme and improving insulation standards and effectively then creating green jobs but at a win-win for all of us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eileen. Then Council Housing, Janette from our West London. Fantastic contributions. Next session, I believe, is on war and trade. Is that right?
Scrap investing people in the war. Stay here.
Stay here.
It's got a video.
So,